All right, folks, thanks for joining us. Today, this speaker is Vincent Morneau. He is going to talk about the top 10 tips to optimize Apex for mobile. Vincent's a passionate Apex developer who enjoys sharing Apex discoveries that takes the platform out of its comfort zone. He's the author of Apex Nitro, Apex CL, Material Apex, and he is the co-founder of Fabe, an application built with Apex to inspire people to take a stand against climate change. Thank you, Vincent. All yours.
All right. Thank you, Bo. And good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are right now. It's 9 p.m. for me, so good evening it's going to be. Today, I am going to share 10 tips to optimize your Apex application for mobile experience. And I understand that saying optimizing is a very broad term. So by optimizing, I mean user experience, performance, whatever. So I wanted to have a global playground to play with and offer 10 tips that I've come across in my career using many Apex applications. Some of them are going to be from the Fabe application, which I hope I'm going to be able to show, but also overall tips that you can use in your universal theme application. So let's just dive in. First of all, my name is Vincent. I work for Insum as the lead front-end developer. I've been working with Apex for my entire career, so it's been 10 years, and Apex is my focus. I am also an Oracle ace. I do a lot of open source work. I am the author of Apex Nitro, build a tool for doing better JavaScript and CSS in Apex. I am also the author of Apex CL and the co-founder of Fabe, which I encourage you to check it out. Just a quick word about Insum. I'm sure most of you right now know Insum. We offer consultant development. And I just want to plug in that on April 23rd, we're doing a special day. We're starting an initiative called Insum Insider, in which we're going to have many different speakers, have some kind of podcast discussions, and we will share a lot of our knowledge regarding Apex. So please attend. And I always do this now because in the past, I've been accused of putting so many code in my sessions. So I want to put this disclaimer. This session or this webinar promotes some practices that are antithetical to low code. But I think it's fine sometimes. So please bear with me. And I'm just gonna dive right into my 10 tips. So the first one is perhaps the most simple one, but a very useful tip to know. So as you develop applications in Apex, you know you've got the builder and you kind of arrange your components, your regions, your items on top of one another or maybe next to each other, like we see on the left screen right here. I have the first name and the last name next to each other. And it arranges itself automatically on the builder. And somewhere around 640 pixels, as you shrink your screen, you're going to see those fields stack on top of each other. So they stop using the setting that you've set in the Apex builder and they go to a default mobile view. So that's fine. Most of the times, Apex does this to avoid creating complex layouts on mobile. But there are some cases where you would like to have fields on a mobile device that is next to each other, or maybe two regions. And there are ways to do that. You can actually go to the universal theme reference application on apexoracle.com. And on this section, which is the grid layout, you'll get a really good documentation about how to manage your components beyond what you do on the builder. So on the builder, you actually design things that go from a tablet upwards. So what it means is you're going to get the layout that you're designing on the Apex Builder on a tablet, and it will also work on a desktop and even bigger. But it will resize automatically for mobile, as we've seen before. So a way to prevent that, if you want to keep your layout on a mobile device, is to use the columned CSS class property. And in there, you can inject special classes that the documentation explains very clearly, that allows you to define your fields or your regions to be exactly the size you want. So in this case right here, I am keeping the first name and the last name to be half the width of my entire row. The second tip I want to share is designing for mobile. And by that, I mean basically knowing the different types of components in Apex that are there for you and available out of the box for, and that are more user-friendly, mobile-friendly than other components. So the first type of component I want to talk about is really about the navigation. So as you know, when you create an Apex application, you've got a default navigation pattern. That is something that works on the side of your screen, and you can open and collapse that menu, which works great on a desktop, and you still see a little piece of your menu. And on the mobile side, it actually hides completely. So Apex does a lot of the work for you to make it more usable and mobile friendly. And that's the default behavior of an application navigation. And one simple tip that you should know is to toggle the navigation pattern to use a tab menu instead. So when you use a tab menu, your navigation menu is going to be on top on a desktop view, but on the mobile, it's going to fall back to a bottom navigation, which is very, very handy. And that kind of pattern is very popular amongst other apps like Twitter or Facebook or any social media. People are accustomed to bottom navigation on mobile. So there is a very simple way to do this by simply changing the navigation template in the shared components of your application. Another way to think for mobile, especially when using forms, is to try to keep the forms as light as possible. And I know sometimes you have big tables and you want to put a lot of the fields into a single page, but in those cases, if your mobile application is designed for mobile, you might want to think about using multiple pages, and maybe in a wizard-like kind of way, to reduce the amount of fields that fit in a single page. Also, I would encourage to use a lot of iconography, simple icons that makes it really attractive and easy to use. And as far as buttons, a good pattern to use is to use stretched buttons. And don't be afraid to increase the size of your button to make it big. One of the most often feedback that I receive about mobile is people are having problems clicking on the fields or on the buttons with their big thumbs. So don't be shy of making things big. Stretch the fields, make them larger, increase the button sizes. So don't be shy of doing that. And as far as the forms are concerned, 2 tips that I would suggest is for checkboxes and radio buttons, there's a template option called Display as Pill, and it will actually turn checkboxes and radio buttons that are very small to use on a mobile device into these big pills elements, which are much more user-friendly. And the other item type that I would suggest for designing mobile applications is the switch. This could replace potentially radio buttons, especially those that only have 2 options, and also select lists as well. Another tip for designing for mobile is trying to avoid creating complex reports. I know we're accustomed to creating those interactive reports, interactive grids, but for mobile, they're not really user-friendly because you can't see all the data that is relevant for a row on a single view on a mobile device. So what we have to do is try to rethink complex reports instead, and maybe use lists or reflow reports or cards. Actually, I want to demo reflow reports because I think it's one of the most underrated type of components in Apex. So I'm just going to go to apex.oracle.com/ut, and under component, there is a specific component called is it under data table? Reflow report. So this is a really interesting one because on a desktop device, you kind of see the regular table with rows and columns. But as you shrink your screen and get closer to a mobile device, then the report completely changes to contain all the different columns vertically. So on a mobile device, you get to see all the information at once. The third tip that I want to talk about is make it installable. Now, those of you who've seen me giving talks before on PWA know what I'm talking about. So I have to take a step back because before introducing this concept, I have to explain what a PWA is. It's a progressive web app, and it's basically a set of concepts that is aiming to make web applications closer to native applications. So PWAs really are defined by 3 main concepts, which is you have to have your application load fast, and your application must be engaging, and they must be reliable. And by reliable, we mean available offline and so on. In the context of this session, for a tip for mobile devices, I really want to focus on one thing, because this could be kind of a word salad, right? Of course, every application must be fast, engaging, and reliable. But to me, the thing that makes a PWA stand out, the reason why you must build a PWA is if you think your application is actually worthy of being on a phone home screen. So that's a very simple question that I think most of you could answer when you think of your own application. And if you think your application belongs on the home screen, then please have a look at PWA. So at a very, very high level, a PWA requires 2 special files to function properly and eventually end up on the home screen of a phone. The first type of file is called a web app manifest. And a web app manifest is just a JSON file that contains very basic information about your application, like the name of your application, the start URL of your application, what kind of display you would like to see for this application. You can read about all of the properties and options you have for the web app manifest if you do a quick search on Google. But basically, by having this file referenced in my Apex application, I am now able to drop my application onto a home screen using a very simple installation process, which I'm going to show a little bit later. The second file you need to have for a PWA is a service worker. The service worker is essentially the brain of a PWA. It's a file that joins all the pieces together and is able to run code at many levels of the PWA features, such as when the application is installed, when data resources are fetched from the server, and how you can interact with it for caching or more. The service worker also handles push notifications and what to do when you click on your notifications. So the service worker, in fact, is JavaScript that runs in the background and is able to effectively run code even when the phone is off and the user is not actively playing with the application. So what you would have to do inside of Apex to register your PWA is using the navigator.serviceworker API. And what you do here is you actually reference the service worker file that we talked about before. So now you're connecting the service worker to Apex. The catch here is that the manifest and the service worker have to have special file locations. For instance, if your app is located at myapp.com/ords f?p200, this is my standard Apex application URL, we would want to have the web app manifest and the service worker being at the root level of your application. So there's a little trick and challenge to actually put the files there. I have a very simple example right here in our nginx reverse proxy environment, where we simply had to go to the atc/nginx/htdocs folder and drop the file there, and they would be available to Apex. A special shout out to Johannes Mickler. I'm sorry if I butchered your name, but recently Johannes had a blog post on integrating the web app manifest and the service worker to Apex using a RESTful methodology on ORDS, which could run on any Apex environment. So I highly encourage you to look at his blog. Very, very useful. And if what I explained about creating your manifest and your service worker is a little too foreign now, I also encourage you to look at pwabuilder.com, which is a very simple site that would generate those files for you. So taking the universal theme sample application, I'm just going to copy the URL from here and paste it into PWA Builder, and I'm going to simulate building a PWA for apexoracle.com. So I paste the URL in there, and it basically detects that I have no manifest and no service worker. So PWA Builder allows me to pick from generated manifest files. So I can look at the generated manifest file and enter the name, the description of my application, start URL, so on and so forth, and it generates the file for me. So it's really, really useful. Same thing for the service worker. And at the end of it, what I would do here is hit build my PWA, which takes me to another page that allows my application to be published on other platforms. So if you want your application to be available on Android store, or the Samsung store, or the Windows store, and even the Mac OS. That's the desktop of Mac, right? You can do that from here. It downloads the file for you, and you can actually publish your application on those platforms. So keep this website in mind. It's very useful for PWA. And this is an example of an application that we've dropped in the Play Store, which is available right now. And it is actually an Apex application living in the Play Store today. Fourth tip, push notifications. This is tightly related to the topic of PWA, so I wanted to get this out of the way, and then I'm going to move on to some other mobile topics. But basically, we're all used in Apex to be able to send emails, you know, and some of you may even have created SMS providers where you can send SMS to people from your Apex application. Well, it's also possible to send literal push notifications from Apex. In a well-designed PWA, you can send notifications from your database to people that have registered to your notifications. So you can send notifications to one user, or even a group of users, or literally all users if you want. Not that I would encourage that, but it is very flexible and possible. Push notifications can be triggered from PL SQL, so very useful in the context of Apex applications. And you would do that by actually calling a web service using the API Apex Web Services.make REST request. And users that receive notifications can actually tap on the notifications to get back into the application. Now, you might wonder, what do we actually call for the web service? What do we invoke? Well, so there's a service called Firebase, which is by Google, and Oracle recommends this service for handling receiving and sending push notifications. So what you really have to do is register an account on Firebase, and from your Apex application, you would send a REST request to Firebase, and Firebase would distribute the push notifications to your user. I had the link in the previous slide, which is a blog of mine that I've described the process in a lot more detail. So if you're interested, you can go ahead and look at my blog. The fifth tip that I want to share, now we're moving away from PWA. The fifth tip that I want to share is what I call off-canvas scrolling. So in our application, we had a lot of content, and we could not fit it in to a single mobile screen. So we started brainstorming what could we do to fit as much content as possible on the screen without taking too much space. Where, well, if you've been using Netflix in the past couple of years, you're used to this pattern, which is you've got the vertical scrolling for browsing the different sections, but you can also scroll horizontally. And this happens to be quite easy to implement. So I've stripped down some of the complexity of Apex Classic Reports HTML just for this demo. But basically, you have a wrapper of cards or of list entries or anything, and you have your actual entries. So this is the wrapper of cards with a bunch of cards in it. What you want to do to achieve a similar pattern is apply only 3 CSS properties on the wrapper, which is display flex, flex wrap, no wrap, and overflow X, which is the horizontal scroll. And then you want to apply a specific width on all of your elements because you want these elements to be the same width for consistency. So for this demo, I've applied a width of 300 pixels to all of those elements. So now I want to get out of this demo, which uses a custom theme and it's not familiar, and I actually want to do this on Apex. On oh, I may have lost it here. Just give me a second. I'm gonna log in. Fortunately, I've lost the page, but we'll do something real quick. So I'm on the universal theme the sample application right now, and I will turn any of those cards to actually no. I'm sorry about that, but I've remembered where I've put the demo. Okay, universal theme sample application. Okay. So we're gonna turn this page, which uses a card template, into a horizontally scrollable component. So let's actually start by using a mobile view of this page. And now I see all the cards that are stacked on top of each other. And I'm gonna go ahead and edit that page. And I'm gonna apply a little bit of CSS magic on top of it, which is my cards container is gonna be display flex and all the stuff. And my card items are gonna have a width of 250 pixels. So I'm saving that now and running my page again. And now instead of having the cards on top of each other, I can actually scroll horizontally. So it's only a matter of 5 CSS properties on 2 different components, and you've got this really cool looking and highly usable navigation pattern. All right. My 6th tip, which I call MPA-SPA hybrid, which is, I gotta explain the difference between the two. So an MPA, a multi-page app, is traditional Apex patterns. As you move from one page to another, you change menus, you go from one page to another, the entire page reloads. The menu reloads, everything reloads, the footer too. In a single page application, your page load entirely initially, but then as you move to other pages, only the content body is updated. So it's not natural to do this in Apex, but sometimes it's worth it, and it's not that hard. I will highlight a solution using simple hide and shows of Apex regions. So going back to my environment now, here. So I've got this page, MPA-SPA. Okay, what does this look like? So I've got 2 regions. The first one is region 1. It has a next button. The second one is region 2, previous and next. Okay. what happens if I load this page? So I'm gonna have region 1, and I don't see region 2. If I hit the next button now, the content, the body was replaced, but I did not reload an entire page for this. I just toggled between 2 regions. So this is very easy to do using dynamic actions. As I go next from my region 1, all I would basically be doing is hiding region 1 and showing region 2. And same thing goes for region 2. I would be showing region 1 and hiding region 2. So obviously, this is not useful for every kind of situation in Apex, but sometimes if you want to make it, if you want to make your navigation really, really quick, that's pretty easy. Now, what we discussed about single page application and the way that we hide and show regions, it creates a navigation history problem. So I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Now, here's the question. Now our buttons are triggering dynamic actions with hide and show effects. So they're not branching anywhere. It's just hiding and showing. What happens if I click the back button from my browser? The answer is you're taken 2 pages back, which is not good. And I'm going to demonstrate this in my application here. I'll load a page again. This is region 1. Can make it. Let me make it bigger. Okay, this is region 1. I go next. Now, instead of hitting previous here, I'm gonna go back with my browser. But now the entire page reloaded. That's not good. That's not what I wanted. I just wanted to execute the code of the previous button. So what I can add to my very simple dynamic action structure is as I go next from region 1, there's an API that you can use, which is the window history API. And what you would want to do as you move forward is you want to push a state inside of the history of your browser. So I'm going to just put some garbage in here. I'm saying I'm going to region 2. This could be something else. And what I want to highlight is that I'm pushing a state to the browser. Now, if I save this and run my demo again, I'm on region 1. I go next, and I will hit the previous button from my browser. Now the page did not reload. It actually went back 1 state. So it's the kind of API in the browser that is very useful to understand. Those things right here, as you go backwards or forward, are manipulatable. You can modify that. Okay, going back. So here I'm highlighting what I'm basically doing, pushing a state. And it was quite obvious in the example we've been doing, but a bigger problem happens when you open modal screens in virtually any web application, but it's also the case in Apex. So this application right here has a button that opens a modal. Same question. What happens when you open a modal and you press the back button? Well, the expected behavior would be that the modal closes, but that's not what happens. You're taking 2 pages back, which is not good. So using the history API that we've shown before, for going back here, what we could do when we go backwards is actually run a very little snippet of JavaScript that closes the modals instead of going back to the previous page. And also, I'm sorry, I gotta get back here, because one of the reasons why I included this as part of my mobile tips is because those of you who have Android phones, you've got an integrated back button. This guy right here is part of the phone. So as an Android user myself, I use that all the time. So navigation is very important in web applications. Tip number 8, lazy loading. And I must confess, I will say a lot of people are not going to like this, but it's something that was very useful for me designing mobile applications in the past. So it is the case that some of the applications you're building end up having many different reports with complex data at the same time on one screen. And we can argue that those applications are not, they have a design problem and they could be simplified. But let's just say that sometimes it happens and you're just stuck with all that data that's loading, and it's loading slow. So from a mobile perspective, slow loading is not good. It's always slower on a phone. That's just how it is. So having a page like this on mobile, we're just bound to have performance impacts. And it will result in a bad experience. So one tip that I've found is for those specific cases where you have too much data for a mobile device, instead of having reports in Apex, and then you put all your queries and so on, and instead of having your page load from the server, what I would do is having empty regions. I'm creating the shell of my regions. And all of those regions here are in fact supposed to be reports, but I'm still creating them as static regions. And instead of putting the query in the Apex builder, I'm moving the query to ORDs. So I'm creating a bunch of ORDs get endpoints. And that data is now exposed as REST endpoints in ORDs, and Apex can query those endpoints. And turns out it's actually very, very simple to call a REST endpoint from ORDs in Apex or in any web application for that matter, because the fetch API is native to JavaScript. So this is a function in JavaScript that you can use, which fetches the data from this URI. So this is coming from ORDs with a schema alias and the module that I want to call. And the response that is being returned contains all the data as an array. So now I've got an array in JSON, and I can build HTML and apply HTML on my page. I know it's not traditional Apex, but in some cases, you got to do what you got to do. So the lazy loading part for content was one of the challenge. There's also a second challenge when you start dealing with an application that is content heavy in terms of images and videos, all sorts of media. So, and it's especially challenging when you start giving the ability to your users to upload content, images to your database. The images can be really big. So there are ways of controlling what goes into the database for images. Now, Oracle Multimedia is deprecated, but there are a lot of alternatives. So I want to give a shout out to some of the plugins that are available. Recently, the Apex Media extension was released, and also the File Upload Media Editor at FOEX, both of which can resize your image before you send it to the database. You can also look at a Node.js implementation. One I like is called Sharp, which does just that. And if you like native JavaScript, you can look at the File Reader API, which also is able to resize images prior to sending them to the database. Then the image is compressed, and when you serve it to your user, it's much faster. Now the question is, how do you serve images to your users? There's a very simple way that you can do this through ORDs. So in ORDs, if you create a GET request that is of type media resource, you can simply query your blob. The blob contains the image, and if you query the MIME type and the blob, ORDs automatically displays the image into your app. Now, in your app, how do you reference ORDs? It's actually very simple. You open an image tag and you simply reference your ORDs endpoint. So that's how you would call ORDs. And the additional tip that I would give here is to use the loading equals lazy attribute of the image tag, which would make the image load much faster for your users. Okay, so I'm gonna speed things up a little bit. Tip number 9, think Ajax. So one of the traditional patterns in Apex is to, fill your forms, submit the page, PL SQL processes are executed, then it branches, and then the page reloads. So it's a good pattern, but also an alternative pattern that sometimes may be faster for your users is to send the process to an Ajax process instead. So when you use an Ajax process, the page doesn't have to submit. Only the content is sent to the server, and you can get a response back and handle the response onto the same page, so you don't have to reload your page. I had a demo for this, but I think I'm going to skip it given the time. But I'm happy to share the application at the end of this session. And tip number 10 for me is really about exploring. I mean, we all love to brag that Apex has all those things out of the box, and it's great and it's fast. But sometimes you have to do a little more. You have to explore and think outside the box. So for those of you who know me, this is an obvious one, but don't be shy of exploring other themes. Sometimes you can implement only specific components of another theme, and at the end of the day, it's just a matter of copy and pasting a snippet of code from other frameworks. In the INSOM Insider webinar that we're going to have starting next week, I'm actually going to show this, how to take one of the cards from a material design framework and use it inside of a universal theme application. So Hayden Hudson and I are going to have a talk and show you guys how to do this. And then there's Explore plugins. And by that, I don't just mean Apex plugins. I mean any plugin. Native JavaScript plugins, most of them actually require one line of code to use. So we talk about low code all of the time, but when you import a plugin, it's very, very low code. And then you can explore GitHub that has all the plugins, NPM as well. And my advice is that you use the code, but you have to understand it and you have to take the responsibility for it. Okay, I know it's time for question. I'm gonna go really fast at this. A few bonus tips that didn't make the cut. From a mobile standpoint, authentication to an application is very important. We're all used to have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We don't have to re-log in all of the time. Of course, sometimes you have to, but it's really great if you can think of a way to keep users authenticated all the time so you can re-authenticate them afterwards. So I've talked about this in a previous talk, so I'm, again, unfortunately going to skip this, but authenticating users can be done very securely on mobile devices using fingerprint methods. And the second bonus tip is what I call the Page Lifecycle API. The Page Lifecycle API is basically supported by all browsers, and it is an API that deals with the states that a tab on your browser have. So basically, a user, when he's actively working on a page or on a tab of the browser, the state of the browser is set to active. And then when he leaves the page, it becomes passive. And if the page closes down, the state becomes hidden. If the user closes the page, then it's terminated. And then there's the states affected by the operating system. If a page is hidden for too long, the operating system may stop allocating CPU resources to the page to completely stop what's happening there. And that's where it becomes frozen. And eventually, the operating system would discard the page. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because when a user opens an application back into their phone for after a day or two, you're often stuck with some weird message that says, oh, Ajax problem, or you've been disconnected. This is not super user-friendly for mobile. So using the Page Lifecycle API, what you can do is you can listen to the state changes. So when a page gets frozen and then it gets unfrozen, it gets back to active, what you could do, a very good pattern would be to redirect the user back to the login page or to the home page or anywhere. But the user would not be stuck with a weird message saying that the session has expired. Okay. So quick recap, all of those tips. Well, I'm not going to go through it. And that's basically it. So here's the last one. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Vincent. We got a few questions on the Q&A.
Of course.
Will your demo app be made available for download?
I will, definitely, yes. I'll tweet it out. So for those of you who want it, just follow me at Vincent Morneau on Twitter.
All right. What's the best way to deal with date pickers on mobile?
I love this question. So I'm using one called pickadate.js. So you can look at this. I think for mobile, it looks just so good. Let's actually show this. Here's a mobile view of a date picker. And if I click here, it opens up a really beautiful date picker. And you can have the same thing for time picker. and it's just full of features, and you can adjust the format and all. It's great. I love this one.
Fantastic. Next one is, do you recommend developing separate pages for desktop and mobile, especially when you have search items with a report?
I do not. I'm a big fan of responsive design, creating pages for both desktop and mobile. And as I've said in the beginning, one of the most important piece of documentation you can find, in my opinion, is in the Universal Theme Demo app, go to Design, Layout, and Grid Layout. And in here, make sure you understand what this is. It makes a tremendous difference when you create your layouts and make them work for mobile up to tablet and desktop and more. You can have, you can actually create 5 different breakpoints for your components, which is great.
We have another question. Is there, other than naming, are there any issues with multiple PWA manifests on the same web server?
No, because I think, okay, I understand the confusion, because if I go back to my slide, I've mentioned that the manifest.json, this is an example. It could be any name, and your Apex application would reference that file. I could call it myapp123.json, and as long as it's referenced as a manifest, it would work.
Have you done PWA on a WebLogic server?
I am not good at backend terminology. It's possible. I usually don't manage that, so I'm gonna have to skip this one.
Now we have another question that says, for PWA, it seems that Apex stands in the way instead of helping. Oracle Visual Builder will be a better way of doing PWA.
Apex sometimes gets in the way in the sense that not all the components are usable for PWA. For instance, I wouldn't recommend using the grid for PWAs. Perhaps not the faceted search either. But we've got a few examples of working PWAs using Apex. So, but I mean, I guess I guess it's true that Apex is not the best platform for creating PWAs. In my previous work, what I wanted to display is that it is not a blocker. You can actually create PWAs with Apex.